Welcome to Shop Talk Live, episode number 270. This is one for the books. It is Steve Latta, Bob Van Dyke, me, up at the Connecticut Valley School of Woodworking. And right off the bat, I just got to tell you that if you're a little bit queasy about workshop accident stories, this might not be the episode for you. You might want to bail after the break. There's a lot of important information, a lot of really good information. I learned a lot from it. I think you will too. So again, just be forewarned, there's some stories. Before we get started, I want to ask everyone for a favor. Here at Fine Woodworking, we're looking to get together a somewhat comprehensive list of community wood shops, be they maker spaces or woodworking guilds with a shop or woodworking clubs, whatever, even shop spaces that you can rent by the hour. We're looking to come up with a list that people can go to and help them find places to do woodworking if they don't have a shop. And we need your help to do that. So if you know of a community wood shop type place, please send us a quick email at shoptalk@taunton.com, and in the subject line, just put, makerspace or community wood shop or something like that. And we'll start to get together a list and hopefully make these places easier to find. Shoptalk@taunton.com, just a quick message, website, name, how to find the place. We appreciate it. All right, on with the show. Gonna start off with selfish question. I want to get into, I never thought I'd say this. I need to learn Marquetry. And I blame him because we are finishing up a shaded fan thing. Sand shading.
That we recorded at least 3 years ago.
Like we were like, COVID? What's that? Huh? But COVID screwed up the process. But so do you teach a lot of Marquetry? Or you do a lot of Marquetry?
I do a fair amount, yeah.
You teach some. Same here.
I teach a little bit. Not nearly as what Steve does.
Yeah.
Do you just, is it one of those things that you got to work your way up to it, or do you just come up with an idea and just own the fact that you're going to screw up a bunch of veneer and just dive right into your project? Because I don't want to do a bunch of samples and stuff, but I'm okay messing up, if that makes sense.
Well, you wouldn't be working for me. I'll tell you that.
Tell him how you got started.
If you don't want to do samples, but you just want to do it, and you're okay with mistakes, you're not.
No. I'm okay with trying and screwing up and throwing it out.
Practicing. I'm
not okay with mistakes. I'm okay with, but I don't want to learn my ABCs. I want to learn the finished product. I want to just jump right in on the idea and keep trying it until I get it right. No?
I don't even know what you're asking.
So in other words, you're saying let's say you've got one design that you wanted, yes. I really want to do that one design.
Yes.
So you're going, all right, I'm going to practice that design 8 times or 15 times until I get one that I can live with.
Yes.
And
that's fine.
Other designs, not really, not today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
okay. That kind of makes sense.
With dovetails, you work your way up. You don't start off with houndstooth dovetails, doing, teeny tiny pins and all that. You work your way up. Is Marquetry the type of thing where you need to work your way up, or do you just dive in?
You have to work your way up. I mean, a lot of it depends on the design. If you're doing anything floral, everybody thinks the flowers are the hard part. It's the stems.
Okay.
2 parallel lines. Those are the things that are difficult.
Really, really thin.
Yeah, really thin. Yeah, that's when you get breakage and all that kind of stuff. And you have to pay attention to grain direction and all that. And that's the stuff you learn from screwing it up 5 times, 10 times, whatever. That's how I learned it. Screw it up. Yeah. Dive in, screw it up.
So that sounds like what I'm aiming for.
Yeah.
Just dive in, screw it up,
It'll
keep
work.
going until it's right.
And if you're really going to go that approach, don't use finished veneers.
Okay.
During the dry runs, use junk, because when you're using junk and you know you're going to not end up with something that you can display, you're willing to take more risks and your blood pressure's lower. So when it doesn't really matter, you're willing to experiment. When oh God, this one might make it, then your whole attitude gets
we start out in any inlay class that we do with Steve, we start out with MDF.
Inlaying
MDF.
That because immediately the pressure's off.
Immediately the pressure's off. You're not going to have anything that's going to work. It's just practice.
By its very nature, you cannot finish this piece. This is inlaid MDF.
Because everybody is so much more relaxed when they're doing the design in MDF. And then when they feel somewhat comfortable, we give them the walnut or whatever the primary wood's going to be.
And the walnut that we're using, like in the class right now, it's like 7/8 of an inch thick.
So you can plane it off.
So they can plane it off and try it again.
You're not playing for keeps.
You always give yourself a back door.
Okay. I like
that's
that mentality.
And that's something that I learned from Steve years ago, is not just in this, but in everything. You know, any cabinet making, anything, leave a back door open, because as soon as you close it, you're screwed. You know, and it's just like you can get out of it if you leave a back door open.
Well, that's, there's a video workshop of you, I think, doing a table, like a side table, and halfway through you're like, well, that screwed up, but I was milling a fifth leg just because I always do that.
Always do. Take something like a top. You have to profile all the edges, okay? What most folks do is they take it to size and then they try to detail it. I leave it oversized. I'll do one edge, then an adjoining edge. When those two are good, then I'll take it to size. Because if I got the final size and I'm running it and I get a blowout, I can't fix it. But if it's oversized, I can take it down, rerun it, and then run it again. So always leave yourself a back door.
Yeah.
So
that's
like when you're running molding, leave them wide. When you have a good clean edge, then cut it to width.
Yeah.
But don't do it first, because then if you blow it up, you can't salvage it.
It's scrap wood.
It's scrap wood.
Yeah. Interesting. That is,
or it's scrap wood, or you go, I'm going to have to use this because I don't have any more. And so now you're going, well, maybe if I round over the edges a little bit, I can get rid of the blowout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks terrible.
Yeah.
So
So recently, though, you and your Marquetry buddies had a session of Marquetry Club. Is that what it's called?
Marquetry Club. What the heck?
You mean the conference, the Windsor conference? It was just it was just a little
we had a little club meeting
of guys getting together.
Philadelphia Museum of Art. It was great.
A couple guys getting together in their basement.
Yeah. I think there were 200 people there.
From various countries.
Yeah. Marquetry Club.
Marquetry Club.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. There was a conference.
It was
joint
amazing.
effort with the Philadelphia Museum of Art and Winter Museum, Library and Gardens on Marquetry on both sides of the Atlantic, going back to, I think, the 17th century, 17th through start of the 20th century. Yeah. It's pretty cool. A lot of really talented people there, really wide array of styles and techniques.
So what is that like for someone like Steve Latta or Bob Van Dyke, where you've been doing it a while? Are you still picking up tips and tricks from people?
Oh, God, yes. Yeah, I mean, the people we had in at Winter and the PMA were way out of my league, man. They were really, really good. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Steve made a comment to the whole group. And after looking at 2 days of this European marquetry, Boule marquetry, all this stuff, and it was just amazing. And Steve gets up and basically doing the American 18th century federal style, and he goes, we're just cave painting. That's what we're doing.
Pretty much.
And you could see, I mean, as cool as the American and the federal I mean, I love that stuff. But when you look at the bull marquetry and all, and you go, oh my God.
Yeah, what they were doing in Europe was just insane.
Yeah.
But if you have a monarchy throwing money at you, I mean, you can afford to do it.
Yeah.
All right, explain bull marquetry.
Well, bull marquetry is when you're cutting out the whole stack and you have a primary and a secondary, and then basically it's piecing the stuff back together after you cut it out, as opposed to the piece by piece method where you're cutting the pieces independently, which is insane, which is what the Europeans do, and then put them all together. Bull, you have a stack, you cut it out. Often brass and ebony are involved in traditional bull work, but it's the technique of basically stack cutting.
And is that the one where you wind up with basically two finished pieces?
Yes, reversed.
One's a negative of the other.
Yeah, and I don't remember the
party and contraparty.
Yeah, I should know that, but I don't.
Yeah.
Because I'm not the good European guy. I'm the cave painter here in America. So, but I mean, I'm telling you. If you look at what we were doing in 1790 and what the Europeans were doing in 1790, there's just no comparison. None. Zero.
Really?
Zero. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, their quality was that much further along.
Wow.
Even during the federal, we were always at least 10 years behind design-wise.
Okay.
Never caught up with them technique-wise. I mean, well, we have with people like Silas and Patrick and all those guys, Aaron, but we know. That's why I'm definitely, I have my strengths, no doubt, as does Bob, as do you with audio and such. But very few Americans are in that league.
So I just love the idea that there's a place where you two go and get excited and start running around like little kids in a candy store.
Yeah.
So after how many years teaching, after how many pieces that museum quality pieces and everything, you're still jazzed to go to this conference.
Well, Steve's one of the ones that put it together.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
I mean, there were
three. I was one of the co-chairs.
There were three of the Steve, Brock Job, and Alexandra
Kirkley. Christos
from the
Kirkley.
PMA.
Yeah.
And those were the three. And I mean, yeah.
And there is a book that's being put together, which should be out in probably take 2 years to get it done. That's going to accompany the conference. Basically, everyone who presented is supposed to then go back and do a chapter article submission for the book. So,
and your chapter's on?
Well, I'm going to be coordinating one chapter on materials and techniques.
Okay.
I think Alexandra's doing 19th century, and I think Brock's doing 18th century.
Okay.
So yeah, but what we had going on with it, besides all of that, we had an exhibition going on with modern day makers, and we had 8-9 people there presenting contemporary work.
That's what that picture that I just showed.
It was
unbelievable stuff.
Really incredible stuff. It's
Frank,
just really incredible. Frank Polero was there, who we all know. Pat Edwards, Patrice Lejeune, Allison Taylor, who just did a Marquetry portrait, and she just won the American Portrait Gallery, first place in their award. So she's very talented. Aaron Redelo was there. On and on. Paul Schertz from Hawaii, Silas Koff. I mean, it was quite a group of artisans doing very, very diverse work. A real talented looking guy, Jim Cunningham, I believe, does guitar faces.
The guitar
he was
stuff,
doing guitar faces.
He's up in Maine.
They were gorgeous. They were absolutely gorgeous. So we had a pretty good representation of all sorts of medium and different levels.
And styles.
Yeah,
it was really, really cool.
Marquetry, and see, people don't often make this distinction, but there's marquetry, which was really big in Europe. And I think what we think of during federal period is not so much marquetry, but more ornamental veneer work.
Yes, okay.
And where you're not necessarily doing pictorials. You might be doing geometrics for parquetry, or, say a pie pattern, which is more just ornamental veneer work. Good veneer work. Yeah.
And the difference between inlay and marquetry.
All right, so people always the Europeans actually don't even quite make this distinction. View marquetry as overlay. So when you're looking at it, you're not seeing the real substrate. everything is covered with veneers.
Okay.
That would be marquetry. Inlay is when you were setting something in holly or whatever into the background. Now with federal work, you often make a little marquetry panel. We call them a pattern, and then inlay that into the surface of the lake.
Okay, so that would be the shell.
The shell would be the marquetry, and the inlay would be setting it in, because the background that it's going into is the actual background.
Okay.
The actual wood, and
the actual wood you're going to see.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Okay. Nice little. Thank you for that. Call for definition, because it is confusing. Yeah. You see so many different things. Is that just banding? Is that inlay? Is that because there's so many elements to this ornamentation? And
they're often combined. Like when you see bandings, there's one company that sells bandings that are ridiculously thin. They're like 1/40th to 1/50th of an inch thick. And the first time I bought from that company, I said, God, how cheap can you be making your bandings that thin? And then I soon realized, no, I didn't interpret it properly. They were making their bandings the same thickness as modern day veneers. Yeah. So they can tape the whole thing together, banding part of the assembly. Yeah. Whereas I typically go back and add the banding afterwards.
As an inlay.
That's the technique that we did with Darryl Keel.
Yeah.
Was, the whole thing, including the banding, was, okay, now let's put it down onto the substrate.
Yeah. And when you're doing marquetry with that type of stuff, it is very important that all of the veneers are the same thickness, or really, really close. Because if you're doing it in a veneer press or a vacuum bag or whatever, it's got to compensate for the irregularities in the surface. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, that one piece will just be floating there in the glue without any real pressure adhering it, making it stick. So,
all right. So Steve Latta's won the lotto. You are probably not doing federal bandings anymore.
Do I what?
If you won the lotto.
Oh.
Right?
If I won the lotto,
yes.
Okay.
No, I didn't alert you to the fact that you had won the lotto.
Oh my God, I wouldn't be here, buddy. Woo! I'm gone.
We had to trick you as it was.
Exactly. So, guess what? By the way, Steve, we're doing this Tuesday night.
Yeah, I didn't.
And you won the lotto.
Yeah, and I won the lotto. Okay.
Well, one good thing came out of it.
You get
so what are you asking me?
So, would you be doing federal style work? Because it seems like the work that you do on your own, in your own time, is more of a modern take.
Oh, yeah. I'm doing more modern interpretation, or I'm doing classical forms with modern day interpretations. But you see, people don't understand. People have no understanding of what a professional cabinet maker is. Okay, and what I mean by that is 95 or more percentage of cabinet makers have no say at all about what they're making. Here's the drawing because so-and-so sold the job. This is the job. You have to make it. Even if you're an independent, you have to build what the customer bought. Very few people are making things on spec because they want to just make that and sell it. So most cabinet makers get their yayas out of the process rather than the product. I mean, I've done some really cool pieces that I really enjoyed making, but there's no way they'd come into my house because I couldn't live with them. They're just too. So from a technical viewpoint, they're a real challenge, and I enjoy the challenge, but do I want it in my house? God, no.
So
it's too much.
But like you, not everyone would know this. If you've read Fine Woodworking for a long time, you think Steve Latta is just cranking out like these museum pieces all day long.
I wish.
You train cabinet makers. That's like your work.
Yeah, my job is to train cabinet makers at an absolutely magical place in Pennsylvania called Thaddeus Stevens College of Technology. Yeah.
And you're training people to go out and get a job.
People go out and get a job and make a living at it. Yeah. Not hobby.
His students punch in.
They punch a time clock in, they punch a time clock out. If they're 1 minute late, I'm in their face. Seriously, because you can't be late.
Yeah.
If you're dressed inappropriately, I send you home and you get dressed properly and come back. I mean, all that stuff, because you have to go to work. And that's probably have a lot of the magazines, or start throwing grenades at me, folks. The all hand tool movement. It's just not practical for making a living, you know? Yeah. So, and I'm trying to teach my students how to make a living.
Yeah.
Doing this.
It's a different can.
It's a different job.
You know, it's like, here you are teaching, you know, Spice Box at Bob's school at CT Valley. Do you have a hard time like flipping that switch between teaching mostly hobbyists, I would assume?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No, not at all. Because what I try to bring to a workshop, I mean, one is the project or whatever, but it is the technical approach to it. How to get to A and B in A to B to C to D in a straight line that makes sense. As opposed to, well, I think I'll work on this now. Oh, okay, well, now that that's done, I think I'll go work on that. No. A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. There's a lot. You know, the articles I've written, you know, about face-on bookcases and, you know, table strategy. I mean, that's the stuff that I think is the important stuff to teach.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so that's what we teach at school.
But in the classes that you've done here over the years, I mean, some of them, okay, so how do you do this efficiently? And that's the whole thing. You know, that bookcase that we did last year, you know, there was no inlay or anything else. It was all about efficiency. And it's really important. And some people, hobbyists, some of them get it and some of them don't. You know, and they'll get it eventually. You know, you do enough times and you go, boy, this took a long time. Well, it didn't have to. Yeah. You know, and there's nothing wrong with something taking a long time if you're a hobbyist.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah. I mean, if you want to do everything with hand planes and hand saws and chisels and stuff, that's great. I mean, that I have no problem with that at all.
If that's your intent to do it all by hand,
and
great.
And it's nothing more than an outlet.
But my opinion is, that's great. Don't look down at someone because they're using machines.
And the thing is,
that's my objection. And that's Steve has the same objection.
Yeah. And the thing is, by the time you're done, every surface is going to see a hand plane or a scraper. I mean, every final surface that anybody will touch will be worked with a hand tool. Yeah. But I'm not going to dimension my stock.
Yeah.
With the fork.
Well, because the fact of the matter is, if you're efficient with a hand plane, that is probably the fastest way of surface prepping any given surface.
With a hand plane?
Yeah.
Surfacing.
Maybe not dimension.
No. But
surface prep. You know, it's way faster hand plane something than run through a bunch of grits on. But I guess if you have a time saver.
One thing that people do know, time savers create their own nightmares.
Yeah,
they leave their own lines.
For people who don't know, Time Saver is a brand of wide belt sander.
Yeah, wide belt sanders leave their own marks that are just as bad as a planer.
I have taken tabletops and put them through a wide belt, and I was like, okay, now we've got a lot of surfacing to do. When if we had just done it by, with a card scraper and a hand plane, it would have been done in a quarter of the time. So it just depends on what you're doing.
Another thing that I think a lot of people do not understand in this, desire for for everything with hand tools and such is we're not working the same wood. No. It's different wood. It's not all long, straight grain that's been split out. I mean, if the wood's been split out, it breathes to hand plane. If you're pulling wood from the lumber yard that's got figure in it, knots and that kind of stuff, it's a much more difficult animal to work with than what the golden age of hand tools or whatever, than the material they were using. So it's just not the same beast that we're working with.
And what we're working with is usually not air dried.
Yeah, exactly.
Which a completely different feel.
We need to get Follensby in on this action.
Yeah. Well, he's a magic guy. I mean, he's able to do it. Peter's able to do it all by hand. He's got a clientele that supports it, and he's willing, to do it. So I tip my hat to Peter, no doubt.
Yeah,
no doubt.
Yeah.
All right, sure. Let's open up the can of worms. That is some questions. Y'all ready?
Sure.
This first one is from Chuck. It's not in the same order as you guys have.
Oh, man.
So, sorry. Dear sirs, I have a request to make a fairly small kitchen table. I am famous in my family for making favorite pieces. I have made quite a few pieces with inlay banding, and it's easy to do and looks good. Here is a wood movement question. Running a banding along the grain, no problem. However, a cross grain, I'm afraid it will buckle or snap as the wood moves. Could you cut the banding into smaller pieces? And Steve's shaking his head no already. And each segment would move on its own, or should I make it via a different approach? I've thought of making it out of 3/4 inch Baltic birch ply and veneering the whole thing and wrap the edges in solid wood to hold up for the inevitable banging from use. Which way should I go? So, cross grain banding.
You want to take it? You want me to take it?
Well, I'll start it and then you finish it, because the cross grain banding, I've done some, and obviously if you're doing it using a substrate, like plywood or MDF or something like that, then the wood movement issues are minimized, so it's not an issue. But like I have the federal table that's in my office. I have another one at home, and the top is, it's got a holly all the way around in the edge, but the top I went to a lot of trouble to select that top, and it's all rift sawn top. So the grain, the whole top is dead straight grain, and it's not going to move like a flat sawn piece would.
Okay.
And when I did it, I was like, I hope this doesn't go to hell.
And that is what, maybe 22 inches wide?
Yeah, about that, something like that.
All
yeah.
Right.
So, but you've done a lot more than I have, Steve. So, what's your take on that?
And there's a difference between bandings and stringing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Running a piece of stringing is a different thing.
What I did was 16th inch.
Yeah. If you're running
square.
If you're running banding along the edge or along the top, cross grain, you're going to have problems.
Yeah.
There was a cabinet maker in New Hampshire, Levi Bartlett, probably 1800s era, and you notice one of the things that's distinct about his pieces is when he puts banding across the front, the edges, he just does the front. He doesn't do the sides.
Okay.
And I'm sure that's why. And we're asked this all the time. It's a lot more work to make a stable substrate, which is what he's suggesting there, and veneer it. But for a kitchen, that's the way I'd go. I think it's going to get beat up because, so applying it to a stable substrate certainly might not be considered period correct, but it's going to last a lot longer. Okay. I have done I have done banding on a dressing table that I made for my wife, and the banding's all still there. But if you run your finger across the front, it's very smooth. If you run it across the end grain, it's like the finish is like crackled or whatever.
It's starting to.
So it's done its thing
because it has gone back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But it's it's fine. It's still there.
That's the life of the piece.
This whole debate. So this gentleman's talking about bandings. It's the whole. Gee, when you put a piece of crown mold on, do you just glue the front? It's the same thing all over again.
I think you've answered that question.
I glue it the whole way.
Yeah.
If it falls off in 25 years, I'll glue it back on.
I love it. Yeah.
I've got a spice box at home, literally, that's over 25 years old that I glued the banding on, and it hasn't come off.
Okay.
So if it comes off, then I'll glue it back on, and hopefully I'll be dead by the next 25.
Somebody else's problem. All right. So what about stringing?
Stringing, I just pretend it's a stable and go with it. I just set it in there and I don't care. I do it.
What's the difference then?
Well, one, how much it's going to be visible. A stringing's a little 1/32 of an inch line. A banding's, probably 3/16 to a quarter or more, or less. But stringing, I think it's just more accepted. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Stringing though, on tabletop, stringing is used a lot going, as a border, maybe 1 inch in from, or inch and a quarter in from the outside edge. But oftentimes it is used immediately on the edge.
Yeah.
Where the vertical plane meets the horizontal plane. And odds are what's happening there is the edge has been veneered, the top has been veneered. If you're pulling your arm down, if the edging was done last, you're going to break it off. If the top was done last, you're going to break it off and you push it up. Stringing is a buffer between those two, where you're rubbing your arm or whatever on solid wood as opposed to the edge of veneer.
Okay.
So that's why it's often put in there, to protect both edges of the veneer. So that makes sense.
So stringing, if there is a problem with it having a gap or breaking in the middle or something because of wood movement, you're not likely to see it. So it's not that much of a concern.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of this comes down to we have this modern day sensibility. If you look at original inlay, there's gaps all over the place. There's tool marks all over the place. There's pivot points all over the place where they scored lines. They ran them too far. They just left it. Not maybe on the highest of high style, but you see a lot of tool marks. And, when you're doing banding or ovals or anything, you act like it's the whole world. But it's one element on a piece of furniture that's going to be up against the wall. And, Bob goes down to the furniture study quite a bit. And they have this one beautiful Maryland sideboard down there. And it's a really nice piece, and it has 4 shells on it. 3 of them match. 1 of them's an oddball. Nobody notices. Nobody. The only way I noticed was photographing them and superimposing them on top of each other to see how they were cut. And that's when I noticed they didn't match. But nobody noticed that stuff.
200 years. Here comes Steve Latta.
Well, I can see in the shop, the guy's doing it and he's going, I got 3 of these shell pateres and I got this 4th one. Hey, boss, what do you think? And he's going, yeah, the patere guy's not going to be here for another couple months. It'll be fine. Yeah. No one's going to notice. Yeah. And, you can say there was a piece
and you can't see all 4 of them at the same time.
You don't.
Al has said that to me about some table. Al Breed was like, yeah. You can't possibly look at all 4 of these at the same time unless you take a picture of all 4 of them and put
which is what I did.
Which is how he found it.
That was part of my
I saw a piece at the New York Antique Show a couple of years ago. I went and there was this sideboard and it had 4 legs visible, and there was the card accompanying it was talking about the very rare half fans, because rather than an oval fan the whole way, it was cut in half. And it was like, I could see it. The guy had 2 ovals and 4 legs to put something on the top, and goes, well, if I cut them in half, now I got 4.
Right, there you go.
You think that'll work? Yeah, that'll go.
Absolutely.
And 200 years later, the cards will go, the very rare half fan. Let's charge extra for that.
Yeah. If everyone could charge extra for doing half the work.
Yeah.
Over 20 years ago, a couple of woodworkers decided to put together a woodworking club and share their passion about the period furniture they built, and the Society of American Period Furniture Makers was founded. Since that day, SAPFM has grown to an international group of woodworkers with 26 chapters in 3 countries, all sharing their love of building furniture. With a mission to provide the best in fine furniture making education, members have unlimited access to an extensive library of online resources, the annual conference, quarterly e-newsletters, and the annual journal publication. No matter where you are in your woodworking, there's something here for you. So join us today at sapfm.org, sapfm.org. The Society of American Period Furniture Makers. We are all furniture makers, period. Question number 2 is from Jordan. I love the show. You all are great inspiration for me and when I get stuck mentally between projects. Committing to starting the next big project is a challenge of mine. Thank you for the great material you produce digitally and physically. My question, in episode 231, Mike and Ben discussed the benefits and drawbacks of router tables. But thumbing through a catalog, I see 1 to 3 horsepower shapers for equivalent price to a nice router table. Why should I invest in a standalone router table versus an equivalent cost and power shaper? The shapers seem more robust and a more coherent package. So I have no experience with shapers other than knowing that you, like on the Thaddeus Stevens YouTube channel,
there's 4 of them.
There's like the shaper video after shaper video after shaper video, and they're mesmerizing.
Yeah.
So you're a big fan.
Oh, I love shapers. Like I said, we have 4 of them at the school, and they're often all in use at the same time. But for a home shop, the thing about a shaper, you are not going to have the availability of cutters that you have for router bits.
Okay.
Router bits, there's just a gazillion of them now. Shaper cutters cost more, and you're just not going to have the availability. You know, I'd say for a home, I mean, in my shop at home, I got 2 shapers, okay? But here, just picked up a little one. But we don't even use them here.
The school here, I've been here for over 20 years, and the school that I had at Harris 7 years before that, I've never had a shaper. I've considered it, but we've gotten through and made a whole bunch of furniture without one.
Well, that's why I thought this pairing, because you don't use shapers.
Well, and it's not that I don't want one, because I know I've used it. I haven't used one in 20 years, but we used to use them. I used to use them, but it has more. The router table is more versatile.
Yes.
Than a shaper. Just like a plunge router is more versatile than a hollow chisel mortiser. You know, I can, you know, okay. I mean, that's why a hollow chisel mortiser does fantastic mortises, but that's all it does.
Yeah.
You know, and the router table is more versatile. And when he's talking about the cost, I noticed in the question here, the equivalent cost. Personally, a router lift is the only thing that I would pay for. I see some of these router tables that are, $1,000 plus the router.
Yeah.
And I'm going, why would I do that? I mean, basic carpentry gets you a very, very good router table, and a router table needs to be heavy. The router tables that I see for sale, you can push them across the room. And if I'm running a large piece of molding or something like what you were doing earlier, some of those $500 and router tables and $600, $800, you'd be pushing across the room. You'd be looking for sandbags, but a shaper, you're not going to get a shaper for the cost of a router lift. I mean, what's a shaper cost?
Yeah, I'm kind of amazed at what he's saying the cost is.
There are some available for $700.
Yeah. My router table is a piece of MDF.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all it is, a piece of MDF. They got a couple pieces, brackets glued to it so it won't flex. But, I have 3 2-horse old Milwaukee routers that I use for router tables. And there's a lot of times, like we're running a crown mold right now where it takes 3 bits because we sequence them. And here we got 3 router tables. And I can set up 3 router tables at home because it's basically 3 little squares of MDF with the router. A lot of times I'll take the router with a flat head, clamp it to the bench, and that 8x8 square on top is my router table. So you can do multiple setups with multiple routers. You're not going to have multiple shapers. They take up too much space.
Okay.
For a home shop, unless we got a really nice home shop. But I think for home, I would encourage most people to go router table as opposed to
the other
shaper.
thing with the shaper. And this is industrial. I'm not talking like a 2-horsepower shaper or something. But when I was at Harris, in the late 90s, the shaper operator, Mark, they had a new shaper that they had put in, and he built a hanging shield, and it was 3 or 4 thick layers of 3/4 inch plywood hanging from a portable thing, and so you could put it behind the shaper, so if something bad happened, like a kickback. And yeah, I mean, I've read about.
Oh, it's not a guard to keep your hands out.
No.
Keep
this is
other
like
operators safe.
if something bad happens and someone's walking behind it, it's going to go through them.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, I remember Will Neptune telling me a story about from North Bennett Street years ago, and a piece came off of a shaper and went through a couple walls.
We had a kickback go through 2 layers of 3/4 MDF.
Yeah.
Laminated together. It blew right through them.
Yeah.
Kickback.
And
off a shaper.
Yeah, that's kind of, you read
it's just
about
got that much power.
You read about fatalities associated with shapers.
Okay. I mean, our big shaper, I think it's either a 9 or 11 horse motor on it.
I can't even fathom that.
Yeah, but if you're trying to run baseboard, or you're trying to run, a 6-inch molding.
Yeah.
You need that.
So,
and a cutter for that would be $300-400.
Oh, easy.
Just
easy.
That cutter.
Yeah. It depends. Like at our school, we have our students, they make all their cutters. They get blank steel and they have to grind them. So that's part of the curriculum.
And that's grinding 3 matching cutters, right?
No, 2.
Okay.
2. And it depends on the mechanism that they're using, whether it's going to be because we have a profile grinder, which makes doing match sets much easier. But if you're doing a split jaw, you actually don't create matching cutters. You have a lead cutter, which is the exact profile, and the other cutter, which we call the trailer, is to balance out the head. But so it's just a little bit smaller. It helps hogging out the stock, but in terms of the final detailing, it's all being done by one cutter.
And the real purpose of it is to keep the head
balanced,
running true.
Keep the head, yeah.
Interesting.
All right, leader and trailer.
So shaper, let's just spend a moment talk about the pros. You're doing big jobs with it. You're able to cut your own profiles.
Mm-hmm.
And are you using a power feed?
Oh yeah.
Almost all the time with them, or all the time?
Every one of our shapers has a power feeder on it.
Okay.
For long straight runs, and typically, shaper accidents usually happen during the setup, not the running. Because by the time you're running it, that's when you have the shaper, that's when you have the feeder and the extra guards and all that. But during the setup is when things can get exposed. So you don't. All right. So think of a typical router. You got a 1/4 inch shank and a 1/2 inch shank. All right. Our big shaper has an 1.25 inch arbor. Mm-hmm. So imagine the size bit you have to put. Some of our cutter heads that we use on that shaper weigh twice as much as a 2-horse Milwaukee router, the whole router. So you're moving a lot of metal. I have never heard of anybody having a casual shaper accident.
Exactly.
It was just a little accident I had on the shaper.
Just skinned my knee.
But shapers joiners like routers, there's nothing left to put back on. Yeah. I mean, those are grinders. Table saws, band saws, those make cuts. Shapers, joiners, routers, they grind, man. They're pulp. So whatever they make contact with is pulp.
It's gone. Yeah.
So your arm or your fingers going through the dust system as it makes its way out the building. So and you don't have that much of a problem.
Like I said, I've considered putting shapers in the shop,
and then
the school, but I've never felt the need to go there. Well, I've wanted to sometimes, but
yeah. And the other thing about a shaper too is people say, people often say a shaper is a big router.
It doesn't sound like it.
It's similar to a router, but it's more similar to a joiner.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is on a decent shaper, and this is where all of these $1,000 router tables are. And I agree with that, Bob, completely on that. I would never buy. I don't care who this is. I'd never buy one of those. The lift, yes,
it saves your knees.
Saves your knees.
You know,
the
40
fancy
years
router
ago,
tables,
the lift was like, yeah, big deal.
But the reason the shaper is so much more similar to a joiner, and this is important. All right, so now that I'm a little coffee's kicking in, the big differences between shaper and router are, one, on a shaper, the fences move independently of each other.
Okay.
So there's an in-feed fence and an out-feed fence, just as on a joiner. Mm-hmm. Whereas most router tables, they always have the fence in line, which is a mistake. And the other thing is shaper, but I don't know of a single shaper that's not reversible. Yeah. So you have multiple orientations. You can you can run a shaper clockwise. You can run a shaper counterclockwise.
Really?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Oh yeah, no, shapers run both directions, forward and reverse. Yeah, and there's reasons for that.
Why would you want to run it in reverse?
It gives you more design potentials for your cutters, and sometimes you want the cutter underneath the table, but because it's safer to have it underneath the table. But in order to get the profile you want, you're going to have to feed left to right.
Yeah.
So on a router, that would be called a climb cut.
Yeah.
On a shaper, you just change the rotation of the cutter and its direction of spin, and you don't have that so much issue. There's a lot more to a shaper than a router. They're not the same beast.
I mean, I think that this almost just speaks on, again, the difference between a hobbyist furniture maker and a professional cabinet maker. You know, the things that you have to teach your students to do it's just a different world than what we do.
How many times have I called you up and saying, hey, I need to buy a microphone, but I don't want to spend $1,500. What's the cheap version I can get by that's going to work for me? I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, I've told you three or four.
And Ben goes, no, that's just not possible.
You know, I mean, you've helped me out two or three times. You've helped me out.
Well, there's
it's the amateur calling the pros saying, hey, I need, what do you recommend? Same thing we're doing here.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's, it's just a totally different thing. I didn't know any of that. I've filmed somebody doing using a shaper to flush something, and that's about it. But
the reality is, professional stuff. I mean, it's a different world in a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, routers typically spin at 25 to 30,000 RPMs. If we get our shaper going over 7,000 RPMs, which is basically, a fourth, it's really humming.
It's cruising. Yeah.
It's cruising. Running a shaper at 7,000 RPMs is running it fast.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But if your students are doing a spice box and they're doing the crown molding, are they doing it on a shaper or are they doing it on a router table?
A shaper.
Okay.
If we have the option of shaper or router table in our school, we're going shaper.
But everyone's trained. Everyone knows what's up.
Oh,
Everyone, yeah.
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 Yep.
We're doing the same crown molding here with 3 different router bits.
Yeah. Are you doing the crown with one profile?
No, we're having to combine 3 bits to get it. I mean, just to give you we've had one. This was years and years ago. Fairly serious shaper accident at the school, and it was a big crown mold, and the student was setting it up. And as he started to run it to see if it was going to cut right, the piece lifted up, and he pressed down on it, which was the mistake, and it just kicked the piece, and it took his hand with it. So his hand made no contact at all with the cutter, 0. But he did make contact with the corner of the fence. And he hit it with such velocity that it basically disintegrated the bone. So his finger didn't look that bad, but when they x-rayed it, there was no bone structure left. It was all pulverized because of the impact. And they had to cut his finger back to the first knuckle. because you can't have 3/4 of an inch of flesh without any bone in it, kind of squishing all over the place, So, but that was just the sheer power of the machine. He never even saw the cutter. He didn't touch the cutter, but he touched the corner of the fence.
Wow.
And the velocity from the throw is what shattered the bone.
All that kickback stuff. I mean,
it's real.
Even off a table saw. I mean, years ago back at Harris, I tell my beginning students this story. I had a guy there was a guy who was ripping a piece of molding on a Powermatic 66, and he kicked it back, and it went probably 20, 25 feet maybe. And I'll never forget this other guy who was working on a podium, and the podium was veneered particle board, and that piece of molding went the 20, 25 feet, and it went through 2 layers of that 3/4 inch particle board. Yeah. And the guy who was working on it, he was kneeling down, and it missed his shoulder by about an inch. And he got up and was like, yeah, I might be here tomorrow, but I got to go home and change my pants. Yeah. But I might be back. I don't know. That missed him by like an inch.
All right. So
it's nothing to mess around with.
Let me expose ignorance as I'm so wont to do on this show. Whenever I often hear the argument, oh well, saw stop's not going to stop kickback, and my take on that has always been, well, I've never heard of life-altering kickback. I've heard of...
Most table saw accidents do not occur pushing the hand into the blade. Most table saw accidents are the hand being dragged across the blade.
Yes.
From behind.
Yes.
Which is caused by a kickback, usually.
Okay. But, sure. But non-contact injuries.
Non-contact with the blade?
With the blade, a kickback. Yes, I've always thought, that's going to ruin your month. It's going to whatever, but you'll heal. But it sounds like there are kickback incidents out there that are like, the shaper kickback you described, absolutely life-altering.
I show my students, when we cover table saw kickback photos of people where, it's one thing if it hits you in the gut, but if it bounces up and hits you in the face, then it can be life scarring. And it'll break skin without a thought. There's no part of your body that machine or that piece of wood will even acknowledge exists. It's just going to smack right into you.
Okay.
And if you're standing in the wrong place, or if you're working with stock that's not flat and straight, there you're living on the edge. The riving knife on the saw is critical. Mm-hmm. That's the other half of it. I wouldn't even think of taking that out unless it was getting in the way because of a dado.
I don't comment on that.
There's no reason to. But the thing is, I know another guy a number of years ago who died from he had a kickback, and he's standing in the wrong place. If you're standing right behind in the kickback zone, and he kicked something back. It hit him in the gut, and he dropped dead about 6 hours later.
Oh God!
Because he was on blood thinners, and that did it. The internal bleeding killed him. That was this is a guy I knew years, but it's. There's certain things you do, and there's certain things you don't do. I look at stuff, I see stuff on Instagram, I said, oh my God.
Yeah, there's a lot of crazy stuff
on Instagram. God. That's just like asking for it, and it's certain things you do and certain things you don't do,
But agreeing with Bob categorically, splitter or a riving knife is the number one way to prevent kickback.
And the riving knife
is best.
When I finally learned the difference, when I got the saw stops here, I went down to the fine woodworking shop and used the one that you guys had just to see. And that's the first time I had actually used the riving knife, because before that I heard about the riving knife. I said, yeah, well, I got the Biesmeyer splitter. That's fine. That's, house rules. We always have that in there. And when I saw the difference, I was like, oh, the riving knife goes up and down with the blade, so there's never more than, say, 1/4 or 3/8 of an inch. Yeah. And the splitter always it's bolted to the trunnion. So, I mean, it's always at the absolute highest that the blade can ever go, plus. Mm-hmm. So you lower the blade down to where you're normally using it, and you've got a gap that's 2 inches, 2 inches, and, you can get all sorts of stuff.
All sorts of stuff there. Yeah. I've seen, like Raleigh makes multiple throat plates, one for 3/4 inch stock, where that splitter that he's installed on the throat plate is where you need it for 3/4 inch stock.
Yeah.
If a person is, the problem with the splitter is if you're trying to do a non-through cut, you hit the splitter.
Yeah.
Okay. But what we did forever, and I recommend anybody do this, we use stub splitters, which was a splitter that only came up like 3/16 of an inch. Right. That's enough to keep a board from pulling away. A little 3/16 stub there, that'll keep a board from pulling away from the fence, which might be a good reason, which causes a lot of kickback.
You do a dado, where you can't have the splitter, but you have a insert, and you're doing a 1/2 inch dado, so you got a piece of wood that's just a little bit less than a 1/2 an inch wide and 1/2 an inch high, and that's tacked to the back, and that's all you need. It works really well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna have to put like a warning at the beginning of this episode, I think.
You need to have a splitter or a riving knife.
Yeah.
They don't grow back.
I've actually operated a saw stop without a splitter, and it felt no. I'd rather use my unisaw with a splitter than a saw stop without a splitter. I don't know.
I worked in the trade 16 years before I started teaching. I never used a splitter the whole time. Yeah. Never even heard of a riving knife. It was just stuff that we did. And then when you start doing stuff, showing students, and you see students doing what you're doing, it's like, oh my God, this guy's going to blow his hand off.
I was so close to the edge.
I've done a real readjustment since I started teaching. So, yeah.
All right, let's try and get one more quick one in. What do you want to do? Let's do a quick.
Go ahead.
Can we do? Huh? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
What's that?
Steve's been gearing up for this one since the day it was published. All right. Question number 3 is from Ed. The latest Shop Talk Live, number 217. He sent this in a while ago. Sorry, Ed. I was holding it for Steve. Was especially informative and interesting. The discussion regarding the steps one should follow from initially bringing lumber into the shop to working it to its final dimension to equalize the moisture content with that of the shop reminded me of something I read in a past article in Fine Woodworking by Steve Latta. Accompanying the picture of Steve in the middle of dropping a piece of lumber to the floor, there was a caption saying that the shock of hitting the floor would tend to relieve the internal stresses built up in the wood during the drying process. This little trick would add to my confidence that I could then clean up the piece to its final dimension. What say you now, Mr. Latta?
When that came out, I took more grief over that from other people, And
for the record, I think Pekovic has been on here saying that, like, they made more of it than you wanted to.
Well,
describe, what the article, there was it was doing stiles and rails for door, I think.
Yeah, I wasn't dropping a piece. I was throwing the whole bundle.
The whole bundle went on the floor. I was
throwing the whole bundle. All right, first off, in terms of dimensioning, like stiles and rails are critical, especially if you have a set of doors meeting in the middle. Because if one of those things wonks out, it's just a disaster. So we always started out by taking him down to where both surfaces are clean. Yeah, if it's going to end up at, let's say 7/8, start out with 5/4, and we get it clean at 1/16, and then we take another 16th up to equal sides so it could really, really acclimate. But when I apprenticed under an old guy named Andy. All right, and if Andy said it, it was Bible.
Okay,
and that's what Andy said, so I do it. And secondly, and this is sort of a philosophy that I have with woodworking. I know, like, whenever I cut out a certain type of pad array, I take the rectangle and I put a nail in each section. Bob says, you don't need to do that. I just tape my packs together, and only occasionally had a problem with it. My whole attitude is it takes me probably a grand total of 2 minutes, if that, to take all the pieces, throw them on the floor, bounce them a couple times, and pick them up. If that 2 minutes or 5 minutes even remotely increases the likelihood of success,
it's worth
or
it.
The remote,
it doesn't hurt.
I mean, there's like this,
or the remoteness of failure. So it doesn't take me that much longer to put the nails in each section of the pack. But I know at that point, they're not going to move. So I'm going to do it. If a little extra step can increase my likelihood of success, I'm going to take it. Because if those rails cup out, man, it's a disaster. So thank you, Andy. I'll throw them down. Andy also turned columns for a house on a table saw. So
okay,
yeah, Andy knew his stuff.
Andy had some game.
Andy had his chutzpah. Yeah. So Andy said to do it, I'm doing it.
And there have been more than a couple times over the years since I read that I've been doing stiles and rails, and I was like, well, poof, and just throw them on the floor, and it's like Steve just said, it can't hurt. And if it does help, I have no idea if Andy knows what he's talking about, but I know Steve, and if Steve's doing it, that's good enough for me.
But it does make sense that wood has internal tension, compression and torsion, and we've all ripped a piece on the table saw where all of a sudden it went wacky.
Yeah.
So it bounced them on the ground, relieves some of that. I don't know if it does or not. I don't have any time studies or I'm not an engineer, but I'll spend the 2 minutes.
And making a tabletop and dropping the 10-inch wide pieces of cherry on the floor.
Absolutely.
I haven't considered doing that, but I'm going to do that tomorrow.
So because they're bigger, you have to get on top of the building.
You got to get up higher and drop them farther.
Really need that.
And you got to make sure that it's a concrete floor and not something soft, because you want to really jar.
Yeah, you can't throw it on the lawn.
Well, but anytime you're cross-cutting a panel, do you guys do this thing where you take the offcut and whack it on something?
Always. Always.
Of course. And if it breaks at the glue line, all of a sudden you are.
It's like,
when you're out to lunch, you can't think of anything else.
When you're roughing boards in to do a job, you don't see them as much anymore, but we have a radial arm saw at our shop. And I always cut off the first 2 inches. I'm always slamming it down, because if I slam it down and that piece cracks, that means there's probably an internal check in there, and I'm going to keep cross-cutting until I slam it down and I don't have a check.
Yeah. You look at the corner of the table over there by that chop saw, and it's all chewed up
just
from smacking a cut and going, okay, that's no good, keep going. And I've seen it go 18 inches, and it's up, and it's not going to be like, oh, I'm not going to keep cutting 18, an inch at a time, but you'd much rather find that out now than, you just made a tabletop out of it.
Oh yeah.
And, a couple days or a week later, or it's in your living room and you got an end check now.
Oh yeah.
Oh, put a butterfly in it. It'll look cool.
No, but
please kill me now.
I'm sure a lot of people saw that photo and thought, oh, well, he's throwing it on the ground. One of those boards is going to break. Well, I want it to break now.
If it's going to break, I want it to break now.
Break now. Give it a chance.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I took a lot of grief over that.
Oh, yeah.
One.
But you still do it.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I took more grief from the engineers on the hexagon thing, but God. So whatever.
About that one, I don't know if I want to know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that does it for this episode. And that was awesome, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Thank you, Ben.
Well, that does it for this episode of Shop Talk Live. Again, don't forget to email us with your maker spaces that have a wood shop available and your woodworking clubs and your woodworking guilds that have a wood shop available to members. We'd really like to make this list as comprehensive as possible. You could send those in to shoptalk@taunton.com or email us if you have any questions or comments about the show, shoptalk@taunton.com. If you're watching on YouTube, please click that thumbs up button. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, I took so much. And because let's face it, in this group, there's a lot of pissing matches going on.
Okay, yeah.
No, you don't say. And should have allowed it in with a more.